tonight we're going to be talking about Eurasian social hierarchies. Again, Eurasian, we are only focusing on Europe and Asia and the Eastern civilizations of the classical period, so no America and Africa. Sorry, we'll get to them eventually. All right, question number 1. What is the difference between class and caste? Well, both are a form of social hierarchy, but they are in fact very different. The class system, which was utilized by most of the classical civilizations and most of the civilizations that came prior to the classical civilizations, are defined basically by economic prosperity and familial influence. So you might be born into a low class system, but you could move up because you got a really great education, or somehow your family was able to scrounge up money to send you to a good school, and you're able to move up through your job. So with a class system, just because you're born in a certain place doesn't necessarily mean that you have to stay there your entire life. It's very flexible and offers a lot more opportunity through education and wealth. This is very different from a caste system. Now, the only place where we really see a caste system in the Eurasian societies was in the Indian classical civilizations. The groups are very rigid. There were typically only 5 groups in this caste system, and you were basically stuck there for your entire life. There was not very much social mobility. For instance, if you are in a high caste and you marry somebody who is in a caste lower than you, they don't get to move up to be with you. You move down to the caste system in which you married. So they were very strict about movement between the castes. The whole caste system is basically based on religious ideas and beliefs. So if you live your life well and you have good karma and you stay within what is expected of you in your caste, then when you die and you're reborn, you could possibly move up into a better caste. Now, one of the best things about the caste system, at least for the Indian political system and social system, is that it really encouraged people to do what they were told or do what their caste system told them was right. So it really cut down on things like crime because people wanted to be able to move up into the next caste. So it was a very efficient and effective way of governing people.
Okay, question number 2. How did the inequalities of slavery differ from those of a caste? So how is slavery different from the caste system or a class? And then why do we see slavery as much more prominent in Greece and Rome rather than in India and China? So let's start with slavery versus a caste. So the Indian caste system, even if I was at the very, very bottom, the lowest class, the poorest person had the worst life, I was still recognized as a member of society. So what that means is they're still going to acknowledge me as a person who is a part of society, who is performing a job that is important, while maybe the higher castes don't necessarily want to do the job that I'm performing. A slave is not recognized necessarily as a person. They're seen more as property. So even if I'm in the lowest caste, I cannot be bought and sold as a thing, whereas someone who is a slave can be. Other things that kind of distinguish slaves: they're not going to work for payment, so typically they are not going to be paid for any of the jobs that they do. They have no rights, so if they're in a civilization like Greece, where there's democracy and men can vote, a slave is not going to be given the right to vote. And they don't have a personal identity, so it would be common for them to not even be recognized by their original name. They could be given a new name or some other way of being identified. Typically, slaves were conquered people, so their region was taken over by this empire and they were forced into slavery. So they're not going to be a citizen of the empire. So say I was conquered by the Roman Empire. Rome is not going to see me as a Roman citizen if I'm a slave, but they're also not going to recognize me as a person from my home country either. So slaves kind of lose their personal identity because, again, they're seen as things, as property. Why do we always see more talk about slaves in Greece and Rome versus in India and China? The first reason is because Greece and Rome had more slaves than India and China. This is partially due to the fact, especially in Rome, that Rome controlled a much larger territory than both India and China. So they had access to more people who could be slaves. Most of the territory that Rome controlled, they conquered, so they took over from someone else. And typically, when they are conquering, they're turning the conquered people, at least some of them, into slaves. Whereas especially in China, most of the people in the region that are becoming a part of, say, the Qin or the Han dynasty are ethnically Chinese, whereas the Roman Empire is taking over places like Spain, North Africa, Persia, so there's going to be a lot of different races, a lot of different ethnicities and languages, whereas in China, most of the people, even if they were not yet a part of the empire, spoke Chinese. They looked like the people in a part of the Chinese empire, so it's going to be a lot less instances where those conquered people are turned into slaves. And in Greece and Rome, there are more jobs that are available for slaves to perform, so they become more critical to the economy. Greece and Rome become very dependent on slavery, whereas India and China didn't have very many occupations that a slave could do, so they're not going to become dependent and need slaves as much. Our third and final question: what philosophical, religious, or cultural ideas serve to legitimize the class and gender inequalities of the classical civilizations? So basically what this is asking is, how did religion and culture make it okay for people and genders to be unequal? So if we start with Greece and Rome, Greek rationalism, so this kind of concept of human reason and arguing, wisdom, that kind of thing that develops in Greece and then eventually goes into Rome once Rome conquers the former Greek city-states. Rationalism supported patriarchy and slavery. So a very famous Greek philosopher, Aristotle, he was very prominent during this time period. He made the argument that some people were slaves by nature. This means that he believed that some people were born to be slaves. So based on that idea, it makes it okay in the minds of people, say, living in Athens and then later Rome, to have slaves. If you believe that there are certain people who were just born to be a slave, it doesn't make it a negative thing to have slaves. Aristotle is also infamous for his belief about women, so he thought that women were too passionate and emotional and that they lacked reason, and so therefore they can't be incorporated into political or social activities. So again, when you have a very famous, prominent philosopher arguing that women are too emotional to be in society, it's going to make it okay and acceptable for men to dominate political life and social life and for women to kind of serve a subservient role. In India, the big thing that's going to promote these ideas is Hinduism. So the religion of Hinduism supported both the caste system and patriarchy. As a part of Hindu beliefs, they believe that the four original castes, the Varnas, were formed out of one of their god, Purusha's body. So as a part of the religious beliefs, they believe that these castes are forming. So if you were a Hindu, you would have also automatically believed in a social hierarchy system. Also, as a part of Hinduism, they believe in karma and rebirth. So these are things that, again, promote a caste system and patriarchy. So based on your actions, you can be reborn into a higher or a lower caste. And as a part of these castes, Hindus believe that the highest castes, the ones that can achieve moksha and not be reincarnated again, those were all men. So that's where the patriarchy element comes in. If you were born a woman, you still would need to live a good life, have good karma, and hope to be reborn as a man, because only men could enter into the Hindu version of heaven. And then in China, Confucianism was the big philosophy of this time period. It's not really a religion, but it's also going to emphasize social classes and patriarchy. So Confucius argued that there are 5 main relationships that everyone is born into. And they're all hierarchical. So in each relationship, there's always going to be somebody who's in charge of or dominant over the other person. And it's your job to be obedient to those people who are in power over you. And the way that patriarchy comes in is one of the 5 relationships that he talks about is the relationship between a husband and a wife. And the husband is dominant in that relationship. So the wife is subservient. She's supposed to listen to and obey what her husband tells her. So that's where the patriarchal part of society gets set up.
All right, and that is it for our discussion about Eurasian social hierarchies. Bring in your questions and comments, and we will discuss this further in class.